Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We've been working our way through the books of the Kings, and we're in 2 Kings. We are coming to the halfway point, and man, I tell you, this is like we're starting to really get into the thick of it now.
We are, and it's going to be very confusing.
There's no way to say it. Last time we talked about one guy or two different guys with the same name that weren't even related. We're going to see that over and over now. Right. These are common names, and sometimes we have the king in the north and the king in the south with the same name.
Right. Well, and to me, in my head, if I hear Ahab and Jezebel, I'm thinking Northern Kingdom, Israel, because that's where they were.
Right.
Turns out they had a daughter who married into the Southern Kingdom, which we'll find. So
now we're just
I was that
as if it wasn't.
I was at a complete
enough.
Stop trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah. So we're going to give you the play-by-play a little bit. Obviously, we don't cover everything. Yeah. We'll give you the overview, but
as you go through it,
you might need to read a little more slowly than normal just to
keep a scorecard.
Yeah.
No, I mean it does help. All right, but we are this week. We start out focusing with Jehu.
Yeah. We're halfway through chapter 10. He did some pretty cool stuff last time. Right?
Yeah. So last time he got anointed.
Yep.
And he was told he was going to be king
of the north,
and he decided I will now take the kingdom of the north. So he got both of the kings of the north and king of the south together, killed them both.
Yep.
Then ended up wiping out 70 of not Ahab's, but Ahab's grandsons.
Yeah. Ahab had 70 sons.
Yeah.
So he wiped
them all out.
Right.
Right. And that was last week.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure he wiped out some other people. Wiped out Jezebel and
Jezebel and a handful of others. Basically, he has now wiped out Ahab's dynasty.
Right. So, and like we had talked before, he has solidified his dynasty too. Yeah. So one of the things is none of these people can come back and say, I am the rightful king.
Yeah.
So now what he does is he gets all the prophets of Baal together. So he's in the northern kingdom. Hey guys, I'm on your side. You know I'm on your side. He goes, Ahab only worshipped you a little. I'm going to worship you a lot. So assemble all the prophets. Yeah, no warning bells were going off in their heads. But all the prophets need to be at the temple and in the temple. So they took it at face value. All the prophets were in the temple, and Jehu had them killed.
Yep.
And then he destroyed all the idols of Baal, and then he actually used the temple as a urinal.
Yeah. And yet, he is not considered a godly king in Israel.
Right.
There are no godly kings in Israel.
Right. Well, one of the things is he stopped short.
Yeah.
Which is weird, right? Because you would think he went overboard, but God was certainly happy with what he did. But he also wanted the gold items that Jeroboam actually had created. Why wouldn't you destroy those too while you're at it?
Yeah,
you're right there.
Yep, the golden calves, right?
Yeah,
he created one. There was one in the northern part of the north and the southern part of the north.
Bethel.
Yeah, Bethel and Dan. Yeah,
was that Dan?
Yep.
Okay. Plus, he didn't worship God with his whole heart either, and that's always a bad thing.
Yep.
So God cut off his line after 4 generations.
Yep.
And this guy reigned over Israel for 28 years and was replaced by his son.
Yeah.
And we see that.
One of the easier transitions in the north. We've been seeing assassinations and everything. He actually got a really smooth one.
Yeah. All right. So chapter 11. This is where I got messed up. But here's the deal. There's King Ahaziah's mother. She was determined to destroy her son's royal line.
Yeah.
So it's not that the bad northerners came in and killed my son. She was like, okay, my son is dead. I want to wipe out the whole line.
Now she is. Yep. So we're taking Ahab's daughter, who married into the southern kingdom, right? So married into David's family. So I don't want to think of this as just Ahab's dynasty. Yeah. Ahab's family. Ahab's family, his dynasty's been wiped out. Yes, there's still some bloodline in the south now, but that's still David's dynasty, right? Well, she
Starts wiping out everybody.
She wants to start wiping out. When it says the royal line, we're not talking about the northern royal line. We're talking about the southern royal line. She's trying to wipe out David's dynasty,
Right.
even if that means it's her own family, children or grandchildren or whatever. She doesn't want anything to do with David's dynasty. That's what's going on here.
Right. So one of the daughters, probably not related to her, but that
Like
came,
a daughter-in-law or
yeah,
something.
right. That
Yeah.
came out of the line. She took one of the children and hid them.
Yeah.
And we to this day we hear these kinds of stories that this happens over and over again. And the problem, and that's why everybody wipes out the whole line. So when this child becomes of age, it's going to be a problem because they have the ability to take over being king.
Yeah. Yep. And so that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
This little guy's name is Joash.
Yep.
Also
He's all of 7 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Joash is also called Jehoash. So we're gonna. Now it's two names for the same person.
Yeah.
So sort of like Joram and Jehoram, it's just a shortened version. It's a nickname.
So the priest
Jehoiada.
He really orchestrated this thing.
Yeah.
So he got the head officers, the royal bodyguards, to meet in the Lord's temple, and he's like, all right, here's what's going on.
So we're back in Jerusalem, just in the southern,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, thank you. So he brings out this kid and says this kid needs to be king. But he went more than that, right? He would have had to show them some proof of what happened and explain the whole situation. And then he got their buy-in. Mm-hmm. So now he has the buy-in, not of the army, but of the royal bodyguards and, important people.
Yeah.
And he says, here's the way that this is going to play down. And it was kind of interesting the way that it played out. Basically, they surrounded the king. The new king.
Yep.
And the rules were, if anybody comes in, kill him. Right? If you can stab him, stab him. And that's what it was. And so the king was brought out in Jerusalem, near the temple, near the altar. They anointed him as king. Rang bells or whatever they did, to announce the new king.
Yep.
And the current ruler, right, the queen, she heard what was going on, and she's yelling out, treason, 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 and comes down. They just escort her out of the way and kill her.
Yeah.
And it's mostly a bloodless coup except for one.
Yeah, well, but he did say, if anybody comes out with her,
kill them too. And there might have been.
Yeah, and this is not... We're not joking around here. This is the Davidic king.
Right.
And we're not going to let you wipe them
Right.
out.
And we're in the southern kingdom. And then he wrote up a covenant, which is kind of interesting, saying that between God and this new king and the people, saying that they should obey the Lord.
Yeah.
Which is really all God wants in the first place.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And all the people in the southern smashed the temple of Baal in the southern, its altars and its idol, and the king walked from the temple to the royal palace and sat down on the throne.
Yep.
And all the land celebrated.
Yeah.
So a really cool thing now, in the northern kingdom, Baal is out.
Yep.
And in the southern kingdom, Baal is out.
Yep.
This is the first time in a long time.
It looks like things are finally going to go right.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go
Yeah,
right.
well,
But
that's what happens
does.
when you have a 7-year-old as a king.
Right.
So let's be honest. The 7-year-old isn't really,
Right.
creating law and ruling. So,
Yeah. But he did reign for 40 years.
Yeah.
So you would think at some point he did have to take over.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in Chronicles, I think there's a version of this.
well, and there's
right?
there's another one who is this is going to be similar. There's a younger child. So it's really Jehoiada at these early years. It's the high priest. It's
Right.
God's priest who's really, in a sense, functioning as king. I mean, he runs stuff through Joash here.
Right, but he's teaching him as he goes along,
Yeah.
letting him make his own decision. But obviously, a teacher can have an incredible amount of influence.
and teaching from God's worldview and from the law.
Yeah, but there is a but the high places were not eliminated. And we keep reading the sentence over and over again. And these would have been altars literally put on high ground that people would go and worship and make sacrifices to pagan gods.
Yeah, yeah. And so they would say, oh, well, we're going to sacrifice to the real God, true God, Jehovah. We're going to sacrifice to him. But according to the law, there's the right way to do it. And it's not on that hill over there or that hill over there. It's in the temple where the altar is, where God's presence is. So even if they said that they're not doing it to pagan gods, they're not doing it the way God instructed. So it's still wrong.
Right. So at some point, this boy king is growing up and making some decisions. But one of the decisions that was made, under him was the way priests were paid. Yeah, so you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Well, the way the priests under the Mosaic law were supposed to be paid was through the tithe. Okay, the tithe, and there's no tithe command in the church today. We can talk about that if you'd like at some point. Feel free to ask questions. In the Old Testament law, the Mosaic law, the Levites, the tribe of Levi, were not given their own tribal land because they didn't have time to work the land. They were serving the people. So the Levites, whether they were priests or not, they lived off the tithe that the people brought in. When they harvested their crops, when they were ranching their animals, the tithe was essentially a tax. And when in Malachi 3, when God says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse, I mean, it's literally a storehouse, right? And that's what they lived off of. So that's the way it was supposed to be. Well, they had sort of gotten away from that.
Sure. Well, I mean, they got away with a lot of things.
Yeah,
away from a lot of things.
Sure.
Yeah. So it was a bunch of silver, right? They were paid from silver out of the king's income statement.
Yeah.
Basically, and that got shifted back to a free will offering.
So it was. Let's just say it had shifted to a salary, basically, right?
Yeah.
Out of the king's treasury, everything came, instead of coming into the temple, into the storehouse, it came to the king, and the king paid them. Okay, well, that's not the way it was supposed to function, and so it shifted back more the way it was supposed to function. Yeah,
and interesting. And now they're also making a bunch of changes and repairs to the temple too, which we see, time after time. And like you said, after a couple hundred years, it probably needs some updating.
Well, and because they were not being paid from the treasury, they were being paid from the offerings and the tithes and everything. The treasury was now free to be used for stuff like remodeling and repairs.
Right. So the king of Syria is again causing problems, and he was successful in a number of their attacks against Israel, and he was actually headed to Jerusalem. So this king decides to gather up all the wealth in the kingdom of Judah and to pay off this king. Mm-hmm. Which we've seen that happen before. In my mind, one of the problems is the text doesn't say that he actually consulted God,
right? Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
So it's just something that happened. Other texts say after the priest had died, that this king moved away from God.
Yeah.
And I think we see that a lot in our lives, where there is a person, a lot of times a relative, that is instrumental in bringing someone to God in the family.
Yeah.
And is really that person's rock, and then that person passes away.
Yeah.
And now this person is lost.
Yeah.
Why did God take this person away from me?
Teacher,
versus,
mentor, coach, something like that, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of a shame, but you can see that happening though.
Well, what that means, and if we're using today's language, what that means is that that mentor was, had almost too big of a role, because in this case, the king,
too much influence.
Yeah, the king wasn't discipled or didn't get to the point where he was able to do that on his own, or wasn't doing it on his own. And so when that hole was left, he didn't know how to fill it.
Right. So the king moves away from God, even has the high priest killed, Zechariah. Now, just like there's multiple Zechariahs.
Yeah, there's
right?
this isn't not the prophet, right?
So he actually ends up getting killed by his servants. I mean, that's how bad he had gotten, or how much he moved away from God because of his actions. And his son replaced him as king in Judah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get into chapter 13, and again we got to pay attention to names. All over in here we see things being repeated. But we have the king over Israel. Reigning in Samaria for 17 years, and of course he did evil. God's furious at him, and handed the northern tribes over to Syria.
Yep.
The king asked God for mercy, which it's always funny to me. You move away from God, you're not surprised that something bad happens. Maybe you're surprised by how long it takes. Then they go back to God, and probably with a right heart, saying, God, we're sorry, we're repenting. God eases up, and then they go right back to what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yep.
But by this time, they only had a really small army, right? So, and Syria had the biggest army of the time.
Yeah.
And Syria had already wiped out a bunch of their army, so now they're trying to fight an army, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? They are going to get wiped out.
Yep.
Anything else you want to add there? I'm just trying not to get too deep in a lot of things.
But I would just point out that this is still, we talked about different dynasties or whatever. Jehu's dynasty, this is his son. His son is going to replace him, so at least we'll have
right.
A grandson on the throne before we start shifting away in the northern kingdom. So.
And that's King Jehoash.
Jehoash, which is the same name as Joash in the south,
right.
was also Jehoash. So that's one of those overlapping names that we just have to deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
So near the end of our reading for the week, Elisha, we learn, he comes back into the picture, and it turns out that he has a terminal illness.
Yeah, we haven't heard from him for a little while, right?
Yeah.
So now he's sick.
Right. So this King Jehoash of the north is visiting with him, and he's lamenting that his army's been destroyed by Syria and how he needs help. And Elisha, it seems like a little bit in a sour mood, but he's also dying, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure he doesn't feel very well. So he tells him, like a good prophet would do, some obscure thing to do, right? Take this arrow, shoot it out a window, and they have to help each other, but he shoots it out the window.
Yep.
And Elisha says that arrow just symbolizes that you're going to have a major victory over Syria.
Yep.
Which is big because he doesn't have an army.
Right.
How is this going to happen?
Right.
And then Elijah told him to take some of the arrows and pound them on the ground.
Yep. But that's all he says, just hit the ground.
Right.
Right.
Right. So the guy does it 3 times.
3 times, right? He's like, okay.
And Elisha's like, oh,
you should have gone
been
7.
6.
6, 7, right? You should have, had you done it 5 or 6 times, you would have actually completely wiped out Syria. But now you're only going to beat them 3 times.
Yeah. A little weird.
You know. It's sort of like it's similar, Naaman goes to the Jordan River, you got to dunk 7 times.
Right.
If you're not going to dunk 7 times, if you're not willing to do it.
And he wasn't at first.
It was, right, yeah.
And then somebody said, you have nothing to lose. You're right there. Go do it 7 times.
Yeah, so here it's, beat these arrows on the ground. Okay, well, I'm done with 3. All right, well, then you're done with 3. You're going to beat them 3 times. Oh, well, why didn't you tell me that to begin with? Why don't you just,
Right.
Elijah being a little cranky maybe. Right. But it's also, let's not, this is a wicked king, an evil king. The fact that he's even talking to Elisha is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? But it's not like he's worshiping God or anything. He's just like, really what he's doing is there's only one guy that I know of who talks for God.
Yeah.
I need a political victory. I need this isn't a religious thing. This is, talk to your God and help me out.
Right. So there's a little rabbit trail tidbit at the end there with Elisha. So he dies.
You got one more in yet?
He dies and he's buried. in a cave, and it turns out some Moabite raiding parties were in the land after he was dead and buried, and some men were bearing a different body, and these Moabite raiding party came, and these guys didn't have time to properly bury this guy, so they throw him in the tomb.
Him in the cave.
They toss him in the cave where Elijah is, and as soon as the bodies touched each other, the guy who had just died that was being buried came back to life.
Yeah.
It's just very obscure to me, but it's also very Elijah-ish.
Yeah.
Right? Where there was, like you said, just miracle after miracle after miracle, and he did ask for a double dose of miracles. Yep. And like you said, there's some left over.
There's some left over. There's one more left in him, and he's laying there as a decaying corpse or whatever. And it says when he touched his bones, he came back to life. So Elisha had one more in him even after he was dead.
Yeah. And then we end with a prophecy fulfilled. The whole arrow thing where he was going to be able to, he being Israel, was going to defeat Syria 3 times.
3 battles, 3 times. Yeah.
Yeah, comes true at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, man, that's rough. That's right. Just getting through these names and getting through.
I just ignored every name.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, this brings us to the halfway point of 2 Kings.
Yeah.
Okay. There's 25 chapters. We just finished 13. So
we got more kings.
We have more kings coming,
but we knew what we were getting into when we started it.
Yeah. So, well, hopefully ending on a sort of a cool note here with a couple of victories. Elisha does one more even after he dies, and just some cool stuff. We're about halfway now through the time that the Northern Kingdom has too. Right. Okay, Southern Kingdom's going to last a little bit longer than the Northern Kingdom.
We know it doesn't end well for both of them.
Yeah, both of them are going to be taken into captivity and exile. But Assyria, not just Syria, but Assyria is going to take the Northern Kingdom, and this is who Jonah was talking about, and some stuff. So we'll
work through that.
Yeah, we're going to work through some of this stuff. So, take it slow. Like I said, don't get tripped up on some of these names, but we'll do this. We'll pick up here when we come back next time, and we'll just keep slogging through here, seeing God's justice, but also God's righteousness and his faithfulness for those who are willing to come back to him. And I think that's really a cool part of the story.
Yeah, I love the way it all plays out.
Yeah. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.